Hello, and welcome back to London Cycle Routes. Today, I'll be showing you how to cycle from Archway in North London to Tottenham Court Road in Central London. This ride takes about half an hour, and you can do the whole thing on quiet streets and protected cycle lanes. By public transport, the same journey also takes around half an hour, so cycling is a competitive way to make this trip. If you find this video useful or you just enjoy watching it, then please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, as I try to post new videos just like it every week. I'd also like to say a huge thank you to everybody who supports the channel on Patreon. If you'd like to contribute too, then you can find a link in the description below the video. Alright, let's get going. So we're starting by Navigator Square in Archway, and you've actually got two options here. I think a lot of more confident cyclists doing this route regularly would probably just head straight down Holloway Road using the bus lanes, and I might do that myself were I taking this as my commute, but for the first bit of the video I'm just going to show you how to bypass Holloway Road, which can get quite busy at times. This first bit does look a bit counterintuitive as it's a bit of a detour and goes in the wrong direction for a couple of minutes, but if you're less confident on main roads and want to avoid this stretch of it, then this is probably the way to do it. The issue for us is that the Gospel Oak to Barking railway line runs directly to the south of Archway, and there were only really two places that you can cross it. One is the aforementioned Holloway Road, which is quite busy. The other is a railway bridge at Sussex Way, which is much nicer, but a little bit out of our way, and that's where we're heading for now. This detour does only take 1 or 2 minutes though, so although it looks a bit weird on a map, if you're not in the mood for braving a main road, then it's probably quite a nice way to go. The railway bridge is just here, and it's fully closed to motor traffic, so it's a perfectly pleasant way to get over the railway. Once we've crossed it, we then double back on ourselves and are now heading in the right direction to get into central London and towards Tottenham Court Road. One thing for infrastructure nerds to watch out for on this street is this little build out here, which you're directed to cycle over. The reason for that is that it's a way of closing the street in one direction to motor traffic while still leaving it open to cycling. You don't see it used very often. The only other example I can personally think of is on Aristotle Road near Clapham, and these days you probably just do it with a no entry sign and an accept cycles sign underneath saying that bikes are allowed to go through there still. Incidentally, if you did decide to just cycle down Holloway Road, then you would meet this route just at the end of Davenant Road here, where this crossing is. I would probably turn in left to join us just here, and then use the crossing that we're about to take here to turn right. This is a really old crossing, and it's actually a fairly decent piece of infrastructure, apart from that very weird chicane that's been put in there. It puts us right into Whittington Park, which also has a surprisingly decent cycle path on it, which is separated by a low curb from the pedestrian pathway, and that seems to be doing a pretty decent job of keeping pedestrians on one side and bikes on the other side. You don't often see this kind of treatment in infrastructure that's this old. We are actually cycling on an old London Cycle Network route from the 1980s and 1990s here. I'm only going to follow it for a relatively short time and improvise the rest of the route, but there are some pretty nice improvements, like this modal filter, the crossing that we went across, and that pathway in the park, which help link things up quite nicely and are actually of a really quite decent standard for the time that it was put in. We're cycling mostly on the carriageway here, and the streets are genuinely actually quite quiet around here, thanks to a partial low traffic neighbourhood dating back from I think the 1980s and 90s. This closure up ahead here with the bollards is one example of how motor traffic can't use the streets as a through route and is sent the long way round, which makes it nice and quiet for us to cycle on and also for residents. One improvement that could be made to the route is the crossing of this street here. We actually just crossed Tottenham Court Road. We had to do it informally by waiting for a gap in the traffic, but there is also a zebra crossing next to it. You could dismount and use that crossing on foot, but if anyone from Islington Council is watching, I reckon it's worth considering converting that zebra crossing into a parallel crossing which cycles can use as well. I know they've done that at various other places in the borough, and given that this route is pretty good either side of that road crossing, I think it would make sense to do it here as well. Islington does have longer term plans to complete the low traffic neighbourhood in this area and add some more filters in just to make it watertight, as there are some streets which currently don't benefit. Now, the official cycle route actually turned off on Carlton Avenue that we just went past, but I think I've actually got a better way. I've kept going down Dalmeny Road, and then I'm going to turn right and cut through the Hilldrop estate just here. The official route is a bit less direct and also goes through quite a dingy, narrow footpath. I think this is definitely a much better way to go in both respects. The only thing that I would change is that this fire gate at the end could be replaced with collapsible bollards or something a little bit more permeable. That would be something else for Islington to have a look at as well, I think. The section of the route that we've just done from Archway is a really nice little feeder route into Cycleway 50, which we'll be joining as we go around the corner onto Hungerford Road just now. You'll be familiar with Cycleway 50 if you've watched some of the recent videos I've done on this channel. It goes all the way up to Finsbury Park, and further up it has a slightly confusing one-way system, but we don't have to use that for this route. The section that we're using today is symmetrical in both directions, no matter which way you're travelling. Hungerford Road, which we're on right now, is largely free of through traffic. There's only, I think, one through route remaining on it, and it's pretty popular thanks to this closure at the end, which means that only bikes can go straight ahead at the end of the road, limiting its usefulness for cars. In the opposite direction on Cliff Road, you use the cycle lane, which is on the other side of those parked cars. And in both directions, it's a completely comfortable ride. The only thing I'd say is you might notice how the camera jumps to the left here. That's because I had to situate myself to the left in order to get the motion detector to notice me and give me a green light across the street there. That's also an issue in the opposite direction, so if you don't get a green light straight away, try moving around and look for the little black box on top of the traffic lights and stand where it's pointing. Hopefully those can be recalibrated, but in the longer term it would be good to see some sort of push button override installed so that you can just press a button and the lights will give you a green light. The next section of the route through Camden Square just here is also nice and quiet, thanks to a low traffic neighbourhood that was installed by Camden Council recently, blocking off all the through routes to cars around here. In this direction it's quite a nice downhill ride, but conversely in the opposite direction it is a bit of a hill, so just be aware of that when you're doing this route in the opposite direction. When you get to the end of the pathway, you can use the parallel crossing to give you priority over the road and join the protected lane. In the opposite direction there isn't a protected lane, but if you're coming from Randolph Street, which is where we're heading now, you will get a green light ahead of all the other traffic, so there shouldn't be any traffic on the road anyway, and it actually works pretty nicely and comfortably. I should say, by the way, that this route was requested by a viewer quite recently, and I was able to go out and do it. I do look at all requests people make on the channel. Sometimes it's possible to do them straight away, in which case I try and get on it. Sometimes I have to wait for something to be constructed or completed, and sometimes it's unfortunately not really possible to do a route to the standard that I try and do videos on the channel. But I do look at all the requests, so do let me know in the comments if you've got anything that you'd like me to try and take a look at. This street is of course Royal College Street, which is named after the Royal Veterinary College, which is still in the 1930s buildings coming up on our left here. Royal College Street has a really important place in cycling history in London, and that it was one of the first protected cycleways to be properly installed in the latest wave of cycle improvements, which started in the early 2010s. Some of the Camden Council officers who worked on the project are now actually working for Transport for London and working on cycle infrastructure citywide. And I think that's a really good example of how one borough experimenting and forging ahead of the others can lead to best practice being spread across the city. Just a reminder, by the way, that if you're enjoying the video and you're not yet subscribed to the channel, do just make sure that you hit the subscribe button beneath the video. It's free. All that it does is it means that videos from the channel are more likely to be shown on your YouTube homepage so that you don't miss any. You could also tick the bell icon next to the subscribe button, which sends you alerts when new videos are posted. I generally post them on Sunday evenings, and I try to put one up every week. I think I've been pretty good at that recently. I'm also trying to make a point of mentioning the brilliant map of all the different London cycle routes, which was done by viewer Isaac. Thank you so much for doing that, Isaac. It's a really cool way of browsing the different videos that I've done. Basically, all the maps of the routes that I put together for each video have been spliced together and put as different layers on a Google Maps. So if you want to see what routes I've done in your area, or maybe somewhere where you want to travel, then you can basically browse by the map and see what I've done. You can also sort them by year, so you can look for the more recent routes, or even stuff back in the day if you want to see how things have changed. And I'm always surprised when I look back at older videos how much stuff has actually changed, even in the short time that I've been running this channel since early 2021. Not least, apart from the cycle infrastructure, my own ability to record stable video footage, and also to talk more confidently on commentary, which I wasn't very good at all when we first started. So thank you for bearing with me, and particularly thank you to all of those of you on the Patreon who really help keep the channel going. I wouldn't be able to devote so much time to the channel without you all, and I really appreciate it. So thanks very much. Now, I want to get to the cycle lanes on Tavistock Place, and the way that I do that is usually turn right into Lee Street. That's something that a viewer actually put me onto a couple of years ago. They pointed out that it's easier to make the turn into Lee Street than it is to do at the end of Judd Street, as there's just less traffic down this end of it. But it did also used to be illegal to turn into Tavistock Place from Judd Street. I didn't realise for ages, but there was a banned turn and no accept cycles sign. But I'm reliably informed that the signage there has actually changed and that you can actually now make that turn legally. Although, to be honest, I'd still go via Lee Street just because it is actually an easier turn to make than where Judd Street meets Hunter Street, as there's just less likely to be traffic coming at you when you want to turn right. Now, on Tavistock Place and Tavistock Square itself, the cycle lanes are really good. That hasn't always been the case. They've sometimes been a bit shonky, but this latest reworking of them with these lovely chamfered concrete curbs, I think are actually really, really solid. And these are some of the best cycle lanes in the city now, I think. They were done alongside the most recent resurfacing work, which has made the tarmac nice and smooth to cycle on. Now, I usually go straight ahead here and turn onto Gower Street, but we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to head down Mallet Street, which runs past the old University of London Students' Union. Mallet Street doesn't have any cycle lanes on it, unlike Gower Street, but it's always pretty devoid of traffic. I don't think I've ever seen a car driving down here. I'm sure they do it. I mean, there's a couple parked up there, but it's very, very quiet. And it's also got this lovely tree-lined boulevard. And there's Senate House on the left there, which is a pretty cool building, which apparently inspired the Ministry of Truth in George Orwell's 1984. It certainly stood in for it in the film adaptation. We then turn right onto Montague Place, and we're going to go straight across Bedford Square. Bedford Square is a pretty quiet street, and at the far end is actually closed to motor traffic, but not to bikes. There is a no entry sign here with no accept cycles sign underneath, but there are also some cycle symbols on the ground just here directing us in this direction, so I choose to believe that you're allowed to cycle both ways down here. It then puts us pretty neatly onto Tottenham Court Road, which is our final destination. The station is up to our left there, and there are some more shops around here. Tottenham Court Road is a funny one because it's actually reasonably quiet, especially around this time of day. It's buses and bikes only, mostly. So if you need to get to anywhere up and down the street, you should have no problem just riding on it, I think. It's Monday to Saturday, 8 AM to 7 PM, so generally pretty broad restrictions. But anyway, we've made it. I'm pretty pleased with the route down from Archway. Obviously there's that squiggle at the beginning to get past the railway line, which you can take it or leave it. Obviously most people won't really be starting from right in the middle of Archway Junction because most people don't live on Archway Junction. So if you live just to the east of Archway, then you don't need to bother with that slight detour. But yeah, the section down from Sussex Way all the way up to C50 I think is actually a pretty decent cycle route, and it might even be the sort of thing that TfL wants to put signs along. It was also fun to take a slightly different route through Bloomsbury this time, as I know we do go on Gower Street quite a lot. That's because it's a good link. But yeah, it's good to show you another way of getting around here, in case you weren't aware. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Do let me know in the comments what you think of that. Make sure you leave a like, and thanks again to everybody on the Patreon. I really appreciate it. And if anyone else is feeling generous, then you can find a link in the description below the video. I will see some of you in the comments, and the rest of you I'll see again next time. Goodbye.